They say betrayal hurts most when it comes from the people you once fed at your own table. And for Margaret Holloway, an American grandmother who had built her fortune with the kind of grit only a woman who survived 2 recessions could understand, that truth would rip through her life one quiet Sunday morning in a way she never imagined. Because on that day, her daughter-in-law, a woman she had welcomed as family, walked into her mansion with a smile so cold it could have frozen the expensive crystal chandelier behind her. And in that smile was a message sharper than a knife: give us the mansion and money, or lose your son and your grandkids forever. But before we dive into the storm that was already brewing behind those polished mahogany doors, make sure you subscribe to never miss stories like this. True-to-life dramas, full of betrayal, revenge, and the shocking twists that make your heart race and keep you glued till the last second. Now back to Margaret. Back to the moment everything began to crumble. Margaret had spent the early morning on her sunlit porch, sipping her chamomile tea and watching the mist roll over her property. 10 acres of lush, meticulously maintained land that had taken her nearly 30 years to acquire. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and she loved nothing more than the weekends when her son, Ethan, would visit with his wife, Hazel, and their 2 children. Those little ones were her world. It brought life into the mansion, laughter into the long marble hallways, and warmth into her aging heart. But lately, Hazel had been acting different, colder, distant, calculated. Margaret didn't want to admit it, but she had long sensed a storm coming. That morning, Hazel walked in with a confidence Margaret had never seen in her. Ethan followed behind her like a shadow, his head down, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes avoiding his mother's. The kids weren't with them, and that alone sent a quiet alarm ringing in Margaret's mind. "Where are the little ones?" she asked, smiling as if everything were normal. Hazel didn't answer. Instead, she placed a thick envelope on the polished glass coffee table. Margaret blinked. "What is this?" "A simple agreement," Hazel said, taking a seat with the poise of a woman who believed she was about to reshape the world with a single signature. "You will transfer the mansion, the lake house, and 40% of your liquid assets to Ethan." Margaret stared at her, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Come again?" Hazel folded her arms, leaning back in the chair like this was a business meeting she fully expected to win. "You're getting older. You've lived your life. It's time to secure the future for the next generation, our generation. Sign everything. Today." Ethan still wouldn't look up. "And if I refuse?" Margaret asked, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. Hazel crossed her legs slowly, deliberately. "Then we walk away. Ethan, the kids, all of us. You'll never see your grandchildren again. You'll spend your remaining years alone in this oversized museum you call a house." It hit her like a punch, sharp, deep, breath-stealing. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about love. This was a threat, a cold-blooded ultimatum from the woman she had helped, supported, and embraced as a daughter. Margaret didn't speak for several seconds. She simply stared at Hazel, absorbing the venom disguised as logic. And Ethan. Oh, Ethan, her only child. The boy she had raised alone, after her husband died in a construction accident. The boy she worked 2 jobs to put through college. The boy she bought his first car for. Now he stood there, letting his wife speak for him, letting her use the children as bargaining chips. Something inside Margaret cracked, not in weakness, but in awakening. Hazel mistook her stillness for surrender. "Good," Hazel said with a small smirk. "I knew you'd be reasonable. We can go to the lawyer this afternoon." Margaret finally looked at Ethan. "Is this what you want?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Mom, Hazel just wants what's fair. We deserve security." His voice trembled, but he didn't correct her. He didn't stop her. "You didn't defend his mother." Margaret felt her pulse thrum in her ears. It took everything inside her not to show the explosion of heartbreak flooding her chest. But she didn't become a millionaire by panicking. She didn't survive tragedy by shattering when life pushed her. She breathed slowly, controlled her expression, and smiled. It wasn't a warm grandmotherly smile. It was a quiet, calculated smile. The kind a lion gives when it decides the hunt has begun. "Well," Margaret said, gently touching the envelope with her fingertips. "If this is what you want, then of course, I understand." Her tone softened, falsely submissive. "But these things take planning. You can't just transfer properties overnight." Hazel smirked again, fully believing she had already won. "We can start today and finish the rest this week." Margaret nodded slowly. "Of course, dear." Then she did something neither of them expected. She stood up, walked to Ethan, and placed a hand gently on his cheek. "You're my son. I would never do anything to hurt you, or the children. Let me take care of everything." Ethan finally looked into her eyes, and for a moment, she saw guilt. Deep, heavy guilt. But he said nothing. He let Hazel lead. As they left, Hazel turned back. "Don't stall, Margaret. I don't like being crossed." The front door closed behind them. Silence filled the mansion. But it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence before a storm. A storm Margaret Holloway herself would unleash. Because if Hazel wanted a war for money, power, and control, Margaret would give her one, but on Grandma's terms. And Hazel would regret ever threatening to take her grandchildren away. When the door shut and their car rolled down the long driveway, Margaret didn't cry. She didn't shake. She didn't collapse the way Hazel expected her to. Instead, she walked through her quiet mansion with the steady, deliberate movements of someone who had been pushed to the edge and discovered, unexpectedly, that she had claws. She replayed Hazel's words in her mind. "Give us the mansion and money, or lose your son and grandkids forever." Hazel thought she was dealing with a weak old woman. A woman who would crumble at the thought of being alone. A woman who would sign away decades of sweat-built wealth in fear of losing the children she loved. But Margaret hadn't survived life by being fragile. She had survived by outthinking every storm thrown at her. And this wasn't a storm. This was a greedy child playing a game she didn't know the rules to. Margaret walked into her study, shut the door, and locked it. The room smelled of leather, old books, and her late husband's cologne, the scent she had never removed from the curtains. She opened her desk drawer, took out a hidden key, and unlocked the bottom cabinet. Inside sat a folder labeled Emergency Strategy. She smiled. It was time. Inside the folder were documents she had prepared years ago when she first noticed Hazel's hunger for luxury, designer clothes, expensive taste, lavish vacations, constant pressure to upgrade their lifestyle beyond Ethan's salary. Margaret wasn't blind, and she wasn't naive. She had set up a legal system of protection, one that Hazel had absolutely no idea existed. But she couldn't use it yet. No, not yet. Hazel needed to believe she was winning. Hazel needed to run full speed into the trap willingly. Margaret placed the file back and picked up her phone. The first person she called was her attorney, a sharp, fearless woman named Teresa Holt. Someone who had protected Margaret's estate for over 15 years. When Teresa answered, Margaret didn't preface with small talk. I need to initiate Plan C, she said. There was a pause. Then Teresa replied, Are you sure? That's the one where— Yes, Margaret cut in. It's time. Teresa exhaled. Then come to the office tomorrow morning. Alone. And Margaret, be careful. I always am. She hung up. The second call she made was to her trusted housekeeper, a woman named Sophia, who had been with her for 8 years. Not as an employee, but as a friend, a quiet observer who had witnessed Hazel's true nature long before Ethan ever suspected it. Sophia, Margaret said, I need you to help me with something important. Sophia didn't hesitate. Anything, Mrs. Holloway. I need all cameras on the property reviewed, and I want every recording of Hazel from the last 6 months saved and backed up, and not a word to anyone. Consider it done. Margaret felt a small sense of reassurance. The pieces were already beginning to move. Then came the hardest call, the one to Ethan. It rang 4 times before he picked up. Mom? His voice was tight, uneasy. Ethan, she said calmly, I want you to bring the kids for dinner tomorrow. Just the kids. Hazel doesn't need to come. There was silence. Long, heavy silence. Mom, Hazel won't like that. Margaret smiled softly, though he couldn't see it. I'm not asking Hazel. I'm asking my son. Another pause. Then finally, he whispered, I'll try. Try hard, she said. The children deserve to see their grandmother. When she hung up, her heart tightened. She loved her son more than anything, but she had raised him better than this weakness. She had taught him strength, integrity, loyalty. And now Hazel had replaced all that with fear and manipulation. But Margaret wasn't going to lose him. Not to greed, not to threats, and certainly not to Hazel's desperate hunger for luxury. She stood from her chair and walked through the mansion once more. But this time, she wasn't admiring its beauty. She was looking at it like a battlefield she was preparing to defend. Every painting, every antique, every inch of marble, she had earned it. And no one, especially not Hazel, would take it from her. Later that evening, as she sat in her kitchen eating a simple bowl of soup, her mind raced through her plan. Hazel wanted property transfers. Fine. Margaret would give her paperwork, but not the kind she expected. She would let Hazel believe the process was moving forward while she set up the ultimate reversal. Hazel wanted the mansion. Margaret would make sure she spent a night inside it, but not in the way she imagined. Hazel wanted the money. Margaret would let her get close enough to touch it, before making her pay a price she would never forget. And if Hazel dared to use the children again as leverage, that was the line Hazel should never have crossed. The next morning, Margaret dressed in a crisp navy suit, the same one she wore to court when she won a major settlement that helped build her fortune. A symbol of power, of certainty, of a woman who knew how to win. When she arrived at Teresa's office, the attorney stood up immediately. You look ready for war, Teresa said. I am, Margaret replied. They sat, and Teresa opened a locked drawer, pulling out a stack of documents. Here's what we can do, Teresa began. You legally transfer temporary control of your assets to a trust, not to Ethan. A trust you manage privately. Hazel will think the transfers are real, but in reality, you'll hold full control. Margaret nodded. Good. And part 2, Teresa asked. Margaret leaned back, her eyes cold but focused. Part 2 is the lesson. Hazel won't expect it, Teresa warned. She doesn't expect anything that isn't handed to her, Margaret corrected. But she's about to learn that when you threaten a grandmother's family, you're playing with fire. Teresa slid the documents forward. Sign here to begin the protective transfer. Hazel won't know the difference. Margaret signed. Hazel thought she was stealing from a helpless old woman. But Margaret Holloway wasn't helpless. She was calculating. She was strategic. She was dangerous when crossed. And she was ready to teach her daughter-in-law a lesson. Margaret returned home from the attorney's office, casting long shadows across her mansion's grand entrance. She stepped inside with a quiet resolve. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. And now she only needed to guide Hazel into it. Slowly, strategically, without raising even the faintest suspicion. Because greed was predictable. Greed always walked straight into its own downfall. She spent the afternoon preparing for dinner with her grandchildren. She baked their favorite cookies, chocolate chip with extra chunks, and simmered a pot of chicken noodle soup the way her own mother once made it, rich with herbs and comfort. She didn't know if Ethan would show. She didn't know if Hazel would allow it, but she hoped. She needed to see their faces, needed to remind herself what she was fighting for. At exactly 6:12 p.m., her doorbell rang. Her heart skipped. She wiped her hands, walked to the foyer, and opened the door. There stood Ethan, with both kids, no Hazel. Margaret's shoulders softened. "Come in, my loves." The children ran past her, laughing, their small backpacks bouncing with each step. Ethan looked ashamed, as if even their smiles couldn't lift the weight of what he'd done. "Thank you for bringing them," she said. He nodded, eyes low. Hazel wasn't happy about it. "I'm not surprised," she replied, turning toward the kitchen. "Dinner's ready." They followed her inside. The children sat at the table immediately, chatting about school, friends, and a science project about planets. It was the first sound of joy the house had heard since Hazel's ultimatum. Ethan lingered behind, hands shoved in his pockets. "Mom," he finally whispered. "I didn't want any of this. Hazel, she just—" "Stop," Margaret said softly but firmly. "You're a grown man, Ethan. Stop pretending your wife holds the only key to your decisions." He winced. She poured him a glass of water and placed it in front of him. "Do you think I'm greedy?" she asked quietly. "No," he said immediately. "Do you think I've ever withheld anything from you?" "No." "Then why?" she asked, looking straight into his eyes. "Did you stand there and let your wife threaten me with your children?" He swallowed hard, because she said. She said if I didn't support her, she'd take the kids and leave. She said I'd lose them. Margaret closed her eyes for a brief moment. Hazel had weaponized fear. "And, by being patient, I need you to act normal. Don't argue with her. Don't confront her. Let her believe she won." "Mom, what are you planning?" She smiled gently. "A lesson." Ethan hesitated, torn between fear and love. But then he nodded. "Okay. Good," she whispered. "Now go enjoy dinner with your children. They need their father." The evening passed in warmth and normalcy, something the family hadn't experienced in months. The kids played in the living room, while Margaret and Ethan talked quietly in the kitchen. No arguments, no tension, just the faint echo of what life used to be before Hazel's influence darkened it. But peace was temporary. At 8:03 p.m., as Ethan got the kids' jackets on, Margaret's phone buzzed. "Hazel." The message read, "Why are my children still there?" Ethan said, "1 hour. Bring them home now." Margaret smirked. "My children." Hazel didn't say our children or Ethan's children, just hers. Control. Possession. That was who she truly was. She typed back, "They're already leaving. Calm down, Hazel." No details, no emotion, no weakness. Minutes later, the children hugged her tightly, unaware of the war brewing around them. "Grandma, can we come again next weekend?" the older one asked. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, kissing their foreheads. "Anytime." Ethan hugged her too, longer than he ever had before. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "I know," she replied. "Just trust me." When they drove away, the mansion fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't empty silence. It was strategic silence, calculating silence, the calm before her next move. The following morning, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Sophia, holding a small hard drive. "It's everything you asked for," she said. 6 months of Hazel's behavior, including all the footage from the last few days. Margaret took it, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Sophia. Keep this between us." "Always," Sophia nodded. When she was gone, Margaret took the drive to her study and plugged it into her computer. Hours of footage filled the screen. Hazel yelling at Ethan, Hazel threatening to leave, Hazel cursing the children when they cried at night, Hazel mocking Margaret's age, Hazel bragging on phone calls about how she would secure the mansion before the old woman died. Margaret's jaw tightened. But then, she found the clip she didn't know she needed. A video recorded outside the playroom where Hazel was on the phone with her friend. Hazel's voice was sharp, smug, dripping with entitlement. "Once she signs everything, I'm sending her to one of those senior care apartments. I'm not staying connected to that dusty old housekeeper lifestyle. Ethan will thank me later when he realizes we're rich. And the old witch can sit in her little apartment and rot." Margaret's hand slowly curled into a fist. That was it. That was the nail in the coffin. Hazel didn't want security. She wanted eradication, to erase Margaret from the family entirely. And now she had given Margaret exactly the ammunition she needed. She forwarded the video to Teresa, along with a short message. We move to part 3. Seconds later, Teresa responded. Understood. Prepare for the reversal. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her heartbeat steady, her mind razor-sharp. Hazel thought she was dealing with a frail grandmother, but she was dealing with a woman who had survived storms Hazel could never imagine. A woman who built her empire from nothing. A woman who fought for every inch she owned. A woman who knew how to win battles without ever stepping foot on a battlefield. And now she was ready. Hazel would walk into the trap piece by piece. And when the moment came, the downfall would be spectacular. 2 days after obtaining the damning footage, Margaret received the inevitable call. Hazel's number flashed across the screen like an alarm bell. She answered with a calmness that only made Hazel more irritated. "Margaret," Hazel snapped, not even offering a greeting. "Ethan told me you went to your lawyer." "Why?" Margaret smiled slightly. Hazel was cracking faster than expected. "I'm following your request," Margaret replied smoothly. "You wanted the property transfers started. My attorney is reviewing the process." There was a pause, a long one. Hazel wasn't expecting compliance. She expected resistance. She expected tears, fear, begging, anything that would give her more power to push harder. But Margaret's calmness took the wind from her sails. "Well, good," Hazel said. Though her voice wavered, "Make sure it's done quickly." "Oh, I intend to," Margaret replied. Hazel hesitated again. "And don't forget the percentage of your investments. 40% is fair. We need that liquidity." Liquidity. Hazel didn't even realize how loudly her greed screamed. "It's all being arranged," Margaret soothed. "Once everything is prepared, you and Ethan will come sign the documents." Hazel exhaled sharply, relief flooding her tone. "Finally. I'm glad we're on the same page." "Oh, Hazel," Margaret said quietly. "We're not on the same page. but we will be, very soon." Before Hazel could ask what she meant, Margaret hung up, because the next stage of her plan was ready to unfold. That afternoon, Margaret returned to Teresa's office. The attorney had already prepared the documents Hazel would later sign. Only they weren't the property transfers Hazel expected. They were revocation papers, legal documents that would remove Ethan and Hazel from all inheritance rights, strip them of any claim to her estate, and solidify the trust as the sole holder of her assets. The trust would only release funds to Ethan under one condition: he must divorce Hazel. Margaret didn't want to break her son's marriage, but Hazel was not a partner. She was a parasite, someone who fed on love, twisted it, and used it as leverage. Teresa laid the documents across the table. Once Hazel signs these, thinking they're transfer approvals, her rights to your estate will legally dissolve. And she won't know. Not unless she reads carefully, which you and I both know she won't. Margaret nodded. Hazel doesn't read. She demands. And Ethan? Teresa asked. I'll handle Ethan, Margaret said softly. My son needs the truth. Teresa looked at her, sympathy flickering in her eyes. You're doing the right thing. Margaret swallowed hard. I know. She left the office with the folder tucked under her arm. And as she drove home, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Later that evening, she called Ethan. Come to the house tomorrow morning, she said, alone. Mom, he sighed. Hazel. Hazel isn't invited. He hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. The next morning, Ethan arrived looking exhausted, eyes rimmed with stress, hair unkempt, shirt wrinkled. Hazel's pressure was eating him alive. Margaret took him into the study. The room felt heavy with everything unspoken. Sit, she said gently. He sank into the chair, rubbing his temples. Mom, Hazel is pushing me. She wants updates every hour. She wants to know when she can move in here. She already picked out new furniture. Margaret raised an eyebrow. New furniture? But she doesn't even own the house yet. Ethan closed his eyes. She says she will soon. Oh, she thinks she will, Margaret replied. But she won't. He froze. What? Margaret sat across from him. Ethan, I have to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. She slid the laptop across the desk. This is your wife. This is what she really thinks about you, about your children, about me. She pressed play. Hazel's voice filled the room. Once she signs everything, I'm sending her to one of those senior care apartments. Ethan won't fight me. He's too soft. And once I have the money, I'm getting rid of that ugly antique furniture, the dusty carpets, and her clingy housekeeper. That old witch will rot in a small apartment while we live here, like the rich family we deserve to be. Ethan's face drained of all color. He stared at the screen, jaw trembling, chest rising and falling rapidly. His eyes widened with disbelief, then narrowed with an anger he had never felt before. That's Hazel? He whispered. Yes, Margaret said. Your wife. She said she loved you. She said she respected you. Margaret shook her head. Hazel loves money. Hazel respects power. And she wants both. Ethan buried his face in his hands. I'm such an idiot. No, Margaret said softly. You loved her, and you trusted her. But now you've seen the truth. He looked up, eyes burning with fury. I want to confront her. Not yet. Margaret said firmly. If you confront her now, she'll manipulate you. She'll twist your emotions. She'll turn herself into the victim. Ethan's chest heaved. Then what do we do? Margaret slid the folder toward him. These, she said, are the documents she'll sign. She thinks they're the papers to transfer my properties to your name. But in reality, they remove her from every financial right in this family. Ethan blinked. You want me to trick her? No, Margaret corrected. I want you to let her trick herself. He stared at the papers, then at his mother. And what happens after she signs? That, Margaret said, her voice low and controlled, is when we show her who she's been trying to destroy. Ethan swallowed, nodding slowly. I'm with you, he whispered. She placed a hand on his arm. Good, because we're not done. Later that day, Ethan returned home with the documents. Hazel was waiting in the living room, arms folded, lips pinched with impatience. Well? She demanded. Ethan kept his face blank, just as Margaret instructed. We need your signature, he said, holding the folder out. Mom said everything is ready. Hazel snatched the papers before he finished speaking. Finally, she snapped. Took her long enough. She didn't sit down. She didn't read a word. She flipped through each page, just to see where to sign. And then, with a satisfied smirk, she signed everything. Every page, every line, every legal trap meant for her. Without knowing, she had just destroyed her own golden bridge. When Ethan returned the signed documents to Margaret that evening, she took them with a steady hand. It's done, he said. No, she corrected softly. Now the real lesson begins. Hazel had no idea what storm was coming toward her, but Margaret did, and she was ready. Hazel woke up the next morning with the kind of energy only greed can create. She strutted through her house in her silk robe, humming loudly, already planning how she would redecorate Margaret's mansion. She pulled out her tablet and saved photos of gold-plated chandeliers, velvet drapes, and imported marble tiles. She even added a heated swimming pool design, because, as she told herself, rich families needed rich luxuries. Ethan watched her from the doorway, expression tight, jaw clenched. He was playing along, just as Margaret had instructed. But each arrogant step Hazel took made him feel like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Hazel tossed the tablet onto the couch. We need to go back to your mom's house today. Ethan blinked. Why? To talk about moving dates, she said, rolling her eyes. Obviously. We'll need a few weeks to update everything. And I want that awful oak table gone on day one. It smells like old people. Ethan felt his blood boil. That table was handmade by his grandfather. But he inhaled sharply, remembering his mother's words. Do not react. Do not argue. Let her show who she truly is. So he forced a nod. All right, we'll go. Hazel clapped her hands, gleeful. Good. And tell your mother I want the deed transferred by next week. I'm done waiting. Done waiting. Margaret had given Hazel decades of kindness, meals, gifts, and open doors. But none of that mattered to someone who saw generosity as weakness. A few hours later, Hazel arrived at the Holloway mansion with Ethan trailing behind her like a silent storm trapped inside a man's body. She didn't bother knocking. She walked right in. Margaret sat in the living room, calmly stirring sugar into her tea. Hazel greeted her with a tone dripping fake sweetness. Margaret, we're here to talk about the move. The move? Margaret repeated, lifting her eyes. Yes, Hazel said, planting a hand on her hip. We'll start renovations soon, and since you'll be transitioning into whatever place you choose, I assume you'll need assistance packing. Ethan closed his eyes. Margaret didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply smiled. Of course. Let's sit down. Hazel sat confidently, crossing one leg over the other, like she already owned the place. Ethan remained standing, arms crossed, as if anchoring himself. Margaret placed her teacup down. Hazel, dear, Before we discuss moving, I want to make sure you understand everything you signed." Hazel waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please. I signed the transfer documents. It's all fine. Your lawyer knows what I want, and I trust she'll process everything quickly." Margaret tilted her head. "So you didn't read any of the documents?" Hazel scoffed. "Who has time to read those things? They're written to be confusing, but all that matters is the signature. That's what makes everything official." Ethan looked at his mother. That was the moment. Margaret reached for the folder on the coffee table. She opened it slowly, like unveiling a secret that had been waiting patiently for its moment. "Honey, these are the documents you signed." Hazel grabbed them, flipping a page arrogantly. Yes. I know." "Do you?" Margaret leaned back, eyes sharp. "Because you didn't sign transfer papers. You signed revocation papers." Hazel paused. "Revocation of what?" "You legally removed yourself from any future claim to my estate. And you also signed a marital clause that prevents Ethan from receiving anything while he is married to you." Hazel went still. Her fingers trembled on the paper. What? What are you talking about?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice tight. "She's saying you signed away your chance at anything." Hazel stared at him, panic flickering behind her eyes. "Ethan, tell her she's lying." He shook his head slowly. "She's not lying, Hazel." "You signed without reading. That's impossible," Hazel snapped. "I saw the word transfer, Hest first." "You saw what you wanted to see," Margaret said gently. "You believed you were winning, and you rushed." Hazel began flipping the pages again, but this time she read, and with each sentence, her face drained of color. No, she whispered. "This isn't valid, it can't be, I didn't understand." "That's not an excuse," Margaret replied. "A signature is binding." Hazel's breathing quickened, her voice cracked. "You tricked me." Margaret's eyes narrowed, cold, powerful, unyielding. "No, Hazel, you tricked yourself." Hazel slammed the folder shut and shot to her feet. "Ethan, fix this, I'm your wife." Ethan looked at her with a calm she didn't recognize. A calm born from truth, not fear. "Hazel, you threatened my mother. You threatened to take our kids. You tried to force her into giving away everything she worked for." Hazel shook her head wildly. I was emotional. You know how I get when I'm stressed." "You weren't stressed," Ethan said. "You were calculated, and now you're exposed." Hazel turned back to Margaret, voice shrill. "You can't do this to me. You deserve nothing you didn't earn," Margaret finished. "And you earned nothing." Hazel's eyes filled with a mixture of rage and panic. "I'm not leaving. I'm still your son's wife." "For now," Margaret said. "But not for long." Hazel froze. What is that supposed to mean? Margaret slid one final document across the table. A printed transcript of Hazel's voice, the recording from the playroom, accompanied by a custody and divorce recommendation prepared by Teresa. Hazel's own words stared back at her. "Once she signs everything, I'm sending her to an apartment. Ethan will thank me later when we're rich." Hazel's knees buckled. Where did you get that?" she whispered. Margaret's voice was ice. "This house has cameras, Hazel. You threatened my life, my home, my family, while standing under my roof." Hazel covered her mouth, shaking. Ethan turned away. He couldn't even look at her anymore. Margaret leaned forward, voice low and final. "You tried to destroy me. You tried to tear my family apart. But you forgot something very important." Hazel looked up, terrified. Margaret finished. "I didn't become a millionaire by being stupid." Hazel burst into tears. Loud, messy, desperate. She sank onto the couch, grabbing Ethan's arm. Please, please, Ethan, don't let her do this. He gently pulled away. I should have protected my mother, he whispered. Instead, I protected your greed. Hazel sobbed harder. Ethan, please. But he walked toward the door. Mom, he said, opening it, it's time. Margaret stood. Hazel's cries grew hysterical. No, Ethan, don't leave me. But he didn't look back. Hazel had played her game, and Margaret had ended it. The morning sunlight filtered through the mansion's tall windows, casting golden streaks across the polished floors. Margaret moved through the house with quiet precision, every step deliberate, every gesture calm. The staff watched in silent awe. They knew their employer was not just wealthy, but razor-sharp, a woman whose intelligence had been underestimated at her own peril. Hazel had made one fatal mistake. She had assumed Margaret would crumble under threats. Margaret began preparing for the final confrontation. She instructed Sophia to tidy the study and living areas meticulously. The table was set for breakfast. Plates gleaming, silver polished, cups arranged just so. It looked like a casual morning, innocent even, but it was a stage. Every detail was chosen to disarm Hazel, to lull her into a false sense of control. By 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. Hazel arrived impeccably dressed, a smug smile plastered across her face as if she already owned the mansion. Ethan trailed behind her, tense, avoiding eye contact with Margaret. His shoulders slumped, the weight of guilt and fear evident. Good morning, Margaret, Hazel said brightly, though her voice carried an edge of impatience. We're here to finalize the transfers. Time is money, and you know how eager we are. Margaret's lips curved into a serene smile. Good morning, Hazel. Come in, of course. I've prepared breakfast. Let's enjoy a meal before business. Hazel rolled her eyes but followed, confident in her supposed victory. She glanced around, already imagining where her furniture would go, which walls would be painted, which chandeliers replaced. Ethan hung back, silently praying his mother's plan would succeed without further disaster. They sat at the breakfast table, Hazel chattering non-stop about renovations and timelines. Margaret listened quietly, nodding politely, her calm demeanor almost infuriating to Hazel. She seemed harmless, fragile even, but that was exactly the point. Shall we move to the study? Margaret said after breakfast, her tone light, almost conversational. The documents are ready for your review. Hazel's smugness returned instantly. Finally, she said, striding toward the study as if the house already belonged to her. Margaret followed, slow, deliberate, ensuring every step exuded control. The study's door closed behind them, sunlight pooling across the polished wood floors. Hazel walked to the desk, grabbed the folder, and flipped it open. Margaret remained standing, watching her carefully. Hazel, I hope you've taken the time to read these documents carefully, she said softly. Hazel laughed, dismissive. Documents? I signed everything already. I don't need to read legalese to know I'm getting what I want. Margaret's expression didn't change. No. Hazel, you signed what you thought you were getting, but that is not the case. Hazel's laughter died abruptly. What do you mean? Margaret began pulling pages from the folder, displaying them with deliberate care. These are the documents you signed. They appear to transfer property and inheritance rights, but in reality, they do something very different. Hazel's brow furrowed. Different. What? What is this? These documents, Margaret continued, voice calm but sharp, legally remove you from any claim to my estate, every asset, every property, every account. Your rights are gone, permanently. The trust holds everything, and I control it. You believed you were winning, But in truth, you orchestrated your own downfall. Hazel froze, eyes wide. This isn't possible. You can't do this. Margaret cut her off. I didn't do this to you. You did it to yourself. You didn't read. You didn't pause. You signed blindly, driven by greed. And now, legally, you have no claim to anything you thought was yours. Ethan's jaw tightened. Hazel, it's true. Ma warned me. I didn't understand fully until now. Hazel's face contorted in panic. Ethan, you can't let her do this. I'm your wife. You can't, Ethan said, quietly but firmly. I choose honesty. I choose our children's safety. I choose truth over manipulation. I won't let you hurt Mom or them anymore. Hazel's hands shook as she tried to flip through the documents again. No. I must have misunderstood. These are transfers, not revocations. Margaret's voice was ice. You understood perfectly. You simply wanted it to be something it wasn't. That is the danger of greed. It blinds you. Hazel's knees weakened, and she sank into a chair, realizing the magnitude of her mistake. She had believed herself clever, unstoppable, yet now she was trapped by her own ambition. Every threat she had made, every ultimatum, every calculated lie had backfired spectacularly. Margaret stepped closer, calm and commanding. Hazel, you have a choice. You may leave with whatever dignity remains, accept the reality of your actions, and never trouble this family again. Or you can attempt further manipulation, knowing it will fail. The consequences will be far worse. Hazel covered her face with trembling hands, sobs breaking through her facade. Ethan looked at her with both pity and anger. It's over, Hazel. You forced this outcome, and now you must face it. Margaret placed a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder. Sometimes the hardest lessons are learned through consequences, not warnings. She chose her path, and now she walks it alone. Period. Hazel's sobs grew louder as she finally realized she could not control anyone here, not Margaret, not Ethan, not even the house she thought she could claim. She had overplayed her hand. Margaret returned to her seat, serene, composed, triumphant, but not gloating. She looked out the window at the gardens, where her grandchildren played unaware of the storm that had passed. Everything she valued was intact. Her legacy, her family, her dignity, untouched by greed. Ethan exhaled. Relief mingled with lingering guilt. Mom, thank you. You saved everything. Margaret's gaze softened. I didn't save it for me. I saved it for all of us. And now, Hazel has learned what happens when she underestimates those who have nothing left to lose but everything to protect. Hazel remained slumped in the chair, broken, powerless, and defeated. The perfect demonstration of Margaret's careful strategy. The lesson had landed with precision. And with that, Margaret knew the final stage of her plan was complete. Hazel would leave the mansion. The family would be safe, and Margaret's authority, foresight, and cunning had ensured justice was served without bloodshed, without chaos, only the quiet, inescapable power of truth. Hazel sat frozen in the study, her hands trembling, her mind racing in chaos. She had believed herself clever, unstoppable, untouchable, but now she realized she had signed her own downfall. Margaret watched silently, her calm presence almost suffocating in its authority. She had orchestrated every move, every subtle trap, every detail that led Hazel to this exact moment. The mansion felt impossibly quiet, as though even the walls were holding their breath, watching Hazel's unmasking. Ethan stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. Hazel, tell me the truth. Every single thing. Hazel's voice cracked. I just wanted security. For us. For the kids. I didn't mean. Security, Margaret interrupted, her voice steady, almost melodic in its cold precision. Or control? You threatened me. You demanded my property, my fortune, and even my son and grandchildren if I didn't comply. You call that security? Hazel's face turned red, shame mixing with panic. I thought I just wanted a better life. A better life? Margaret repeated, her eyes narrowing. You tried to take a better life from your own family, from your husband, from the children you claimed to love. You called that love. But it was greed. Pure, selfish greed. Hazel's hands went to her face. She wanted to scream, to bargain, to manipulate. But the evidence, the signed documents, the legal and financial records, and the damning recording of her own voice left her with nothing. She had been fully exposed, her manipulations revealed, her threats undone by Margaret's meticulous strategy. Ethan's voice was low but firm. Hazel, it's over. I see you for what you are now. I can't ignore this. Not after everything you've done. I can't let you harm Mom or the kids anymore. Hazel shook her head violently. Ethan, you can't do this. I'm your wife. I'm their mother. You can't just... I can, Ethan said quietly, though his heart ached. Because your choices left me no other option. You forced this, and now you face the consequences. Margaret stepped closer, her calm demeanor radiating power. Hazel, you have one final choice, she said. You may leave with whatever dignity you can salvage. Walk away. Accept the reality of your actions and never trouble this family again. She paused, letting her words sink in. Or you can attempt further manipulation, knowing it will fail. And if you do, the consequences will be far worse. Legally, financially, socially, you will lose everything you thought you could take from me. Forever. Hazel's body sagged in defeat. Her fingers shook as she clutched the signed documents, the full weight of her mistakes crashing down on her. The cunning plans she had plotted, the threats she had made, the pressure she had exerted on Margaret, they had all unraveled spectacularly. She had been overconfident, blinded by greed, and now she was powerless. Ethan's gaze softened, tempered with both anger and pity. Hazel, it's time. You must leave. For the kids' sake, for all of us, but more than that, for your own sake. Accept the consequences and go. Hazel's lips trembled. I can't just leave. I won't. You can, Margaret said firmly. And you will. There is no other option that does not result in ruin. You gambled, and you lost. This is your opportunity to salvage what little remains of your life. For a long moment, Hazel remained silent, the weight of Margaret's words sinking in. She had no allies here. Ethan was no longer under her control. The law supported Margaret, and every calculated move she thought she had made had been anticipated. Margaret had turned Hazel's own arrogance and impatience against her, crafting a flawless trap that revealed her true nature to everyone involved. Finally, with a shuddering breath, Hazel rose from her chair, her shoulders slumped, her confidence stripped away. She looked at Ethan, searching for pity or support, but found only disappointment and resolve. She looked at Margaret, expecting fury or rage, but found only calm, a quiet dominance that reminded her why she had underestimated this woman at her peril. Hazel gathered her purse and documents, her steps tentative, her pride crushed. She knew this was her last chance. One misstep, and Margaret's legal and financial strategy would obliterate her life entirely. Without a word, she turned and left the study, the mansion, the family she had attempted to manipulate and control. The front door closed behind her, with a finality that echoed through the mansion. Silence returned, heavy but peaceful, broken only by the soft footsteps of the grandchildren playing upstairs. Margaret exhaled, the tension leaving her body in a wave of relief and satisfaction. She had protected her legacy, her wealth, and her family, not through confrontation, but through strategy, foresight, and patience. Ethan sank into the nearest chair, his shoulders slumping as the weight of the confrontation lifted. "Mom, you saved everything. I don't even know what to say." Margaret smiled softly, placing a hand on his. "You don't have to say anything, Ethan. You did what you needed to do. You saw the truth and stood with it. That is more than enough." He nodded, his chest heaving. "I was so afraid. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I was wrong about so much. Hazel, I never realized." Margaret shook her head gently. "Fear clouds judgment, but clarity always comes when you face the truth. You faced it, and that is what matters." Later that day, Margaret watched her grandchildren run through the gardens, their laughter innocent, their joy untainted by the drama that had almost invaded their lives. Ethan joined her on the bench, exhausted but free from the chains of manipulation Hazel had imposed. "They're happy," he said softly. "They always have been," Margaret replied, "and they will remain happy because you chose the right path, and because Hazel cannot interfere any longer." Ethan exhaled, the relief almost palpable. "I'll make sure this never happens again. I'll protect them, Mom. And I will never let anyone come between us again." Margaret placed a steady hand on his arm. "And you will. Teach them to value truth over deceit, honesty over manipulation. That is the greatest gift you can give them." As the sun dipped behind the mansion, casting warm light over the gardens and windows, Margaret felt a deep satisfaction. She had defended her family, her legacy, and her dignity. Hazel's greed and manipulation had been defeated, not through force, but through intellect, patience, and courage. Margaret's gaze fell on her grandchildren once more. They were safe, protected, and free. And for Margaret, that was the ultimate victory. Hazel had learned a lesson she would never forget. Margaret had won, and the family's future was secure, grounded in truth, love, and the unshakable power of a grandmother who refused to be threatened or deceived. The mansion was quiet now, peaceful and secure. The storm had passed. Margaret's calm eyes reflected the setting sun, triumphant yet serene. Justice had been served.